Hello, America. Welcome to the Junto Podcast, where we promote the practical applications of critical thinking and bold creativity. I am your host, Edgar Mills. Thanks for joining us. And today we're going to be talking about some notable police shootings, and we're going to juxtapose those to some police training standards and that sort of thing. Now, it may seem like I'm jumping on a train here and trying to bash the police all the time. I'm not. I'm doing these things in a lead up to a few guests that I have planned down the road. So I want to get a lot of information out there first to set these guys up for success. So let's just jump into it. First, what I'm going to do is go over a few of these notable shootings. We're going to kind of summarize them, talk about the dubious impact it had, and then try to talk about like how could that have been fixed or avoided or just had a better outcome. I'm sure you all remember because, well, most of these are within the past 5 years anyway. So you guys probably all remember the Breonna Taylor shooting. That was in Louisville, Kentucky. And that was a Louisville Metro PD executed a no-knock warrant on Breonna Taylor's apartment. Now, they were going after her boyfriend, who they suspected of being a drug dealer. Now, understand this, people. I have no deep insight as to what may really have gone on or not have gone on, going based off information that I can research, official record, and that sort of thing. So some of you may disagree with some things. Some of you may not believe the narratives you're given and all these things. I'm going off research here, folks. I'm not trying to drag anyone through the mud. I'm not trying to rehash any anger, and I'm certainly not trying to sow any distrust. I just want to highlight how things might have been better. All right, so we all remember so Louisville Metro did a no-knock raid on Breonna Taylor's apartment, and over 30 shots were fired in this incident. Kenneth Walker, the guy who was on the warrant, fired a shot and allegedly fired a shot first, and thinking that their house was being robbed. And why is this? Because the police did a no-knock warrant and they didn't announce themselves. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't knock on a door, police open up, or anything like that, right? So he fired, and subsequently the police opened fire, and one cop shot blindly through a window. Anyway, Breonna Taylor was killed. Turns out no drugs were found in the apartment at all. And yeah, an innocent life was taken. There were bullets from that fire. So I want to say 32 bullets were fired. Bullets went through the apartment walls into other apartments. Fortunately, no one else was shot, but the bullets went through other walls. Now, any of you knowing about the 4 universal rules of firearm safety, clearly identify a threat and be aware of its surroundings. That's to include the backstop. Anyway, so what was the dubious elements here? Why is this dubious? Why was this a bad thing? Did it get so much attention? Well, first of all, I've said this plenty of times. I don't agree with no-knock warrants inside the borders of the United States on American citizens. Now, look, if you've got a cartel cell operating inside the borders, it might warrant a no-knock raid. But an American citizen, I don't think there should be such a thing as a no-knock warrant, because we have the Second Amendment in America, and what exactly happened here could happen to anyone, folks. If the police bust up in your door without announcing themselves, and you're an legally armed American citizen, who's wrong in this situation? Well, I say the police in this particular situation. So the fact that they did a no-knock warrant at all and they did not identify themselves, that's two things that I feel like were like no-brainers, right? But then once the gunfire started going off, what happened? Yeah, all the sympathetic firing. One guy shot into a window that had a curtain over it. He shot blindly, I want to say 6 rounds into the window. And by the way, that's what killed Breonna Taylor. So no officer should be taking blind shots into anything. I didn't have that luxury as a Green Beret. I don't think cops should have it, especially cops shouldn't have it inside the borders of the United States. And then, so all the sympathetic fire, and that happens, folks. We've seen it. That raises questions of like proportionality, right? Because Taylor, not Taylor, Kenneth Walker only fired 1 round, and he did in fact hit one of the police in the leg. And then what followed was 32 rounds of unsighted fire. So I think that's a problem. I think that's a big problem. And I think this case has probably been looked at and studied, and hopefully it's being used as an example in various police academies. So very specific context, the officers, they made entry into the house at about 12:40 a.m. So that's the wee hours of the morning. They didn't announce their presence. They didn't knock and just, yeah, or they didn't boot the door open and yell, police, police, police. So Kenneth Walker, who, by the way, was a licensed gun owner, fired a shot, hit a cop in the leg, and the officers just blazed up. And one guy, I said 6 rounds. He fired 10 rounds blindly through covered window. Now, in the investigation to follow and the outcome of that, one of the officers was charged with wanton endangerment for firing into a neighboring apartment, but not for the death of Breonna Taylor, which is kind of crazy. No officers were charged for killing her, and the city ended up settling with Breonna Taylor's family for a lot of money. And as a result, Louisville has since gotten rid of no-knock warrants out of their SOPs. Now, so that's a win, at least. Obviously, the fallout from that, there was national protests and stuff like that. Mainly talking about the use of excessive force, but also the racial component, right? Because Breonna Taylor and Kenneth Walker are black. So that obviously there's always going to be race hustlers who push that. And then it was just bad decision-making under stress. But after the investigation, no charges, were filed. So that's an incident that we're going to look at ways this can. So what relevant standards can we attach to that? Well, according to the Association of Chiefs of Police or something like that, the IACP anyway, they have guidelines that, they emphasize accuracy, precision in shooting, target identification. And they state that officers must ensure that no innocent persons are going to be endangered before firing. Well, I mean, they can write that, but if the officers aren't executing that, that's a standard that was at play that was violated for sure. FBI use of force protocols requires that officers assess the threat and use deadly force only when lesser means are insufficient. So proportionality, and the military has that as well. And you have to have a clear regard for bystanders. You just can't blaze away and not consider the possibility that there's a child on the other side of the wall that you just blaze through. So the FBI's protocols require a sort of proportionality. And then there's situational awareness sort of, I don't want to say standards, but general rule of thumb is that most of the time officers will announce themselves. But these no-knock raids, I don't know what they expect to happen when they do that, but that's just asking for violence, man. So even on a raid, even on a no-knock, you still have to assess the environment. Like, it's ongoing assessment. And you have to be mindful of collateral damage, man. You just have to. Especially in a friggin' apartment complex where you got, let's imagine a 3-story apartment complex where you live in the middle on the second floor. That means you got neighbors at least upstairs, at least downstairs, and probably on one side of you. So that's sporty for cops. I know it is, man. But that's where the training you have to be there. You have to be there. So those are the sort of relevant standards that we could put against this incident. So let's talk about some of the training gaps that we can put against this incident. Indiscriminate firing is not okay in any situation. It's just not. The police fired 32 rounds in total. 10 of those we know were through a covered window. That tells me that these dudes, based off hearing one gunshot, yeah, they were probably scared. And of course, why wouldn't you be if somebody's shooting at you? But they didn't have the presence of mind to even note that it was just the one shot. So anyway, my point is this: the discipline to have what in the Army we called tactical patience, and then clear target identification. We know that these annual firearms quals that most places do we know that they're lackluster, and they just focus on checking a block and not scenario based, high stress, complex decision making, which I think is overall lacking. So let's get to that decision making. Once bullets started flying, de-escalation apparently was just not a thing. Okay, and I can see that. If somebody took a shot at me, I would shoot back, but not without clearly identifying. That's number one. Number two, the de-escalation probably should have started with announcing themselves. I just, once again, I can't understand what a no-knock raid does for a police department in America. All right, I'm talking about citizens here. All right. And then, now I know this to be true, folks. When you do dynamic entries, as you should do dynamic entries, I'm not advocating this ridiculous limited penetration stuff, and I'm not advocating. What I'm saying is when you do a deliberate dynamic entry on a place, the fundamentals at play, the principles are surprise, speed, and violence of action. Now, being a cop in a residential area, you can do the surprise, the speed, and the violence of action. But if you can't identify the target before you shoot it, you're going too fast. You're outrunning your skill. And I'll tell you this, and I'll stand by it until doomsday: skill trumps tactics every time. So what I see here is they executed a dynamic entry, but they didn't have the skill or discipline to discriminate on the targets, which led to a massive overreaction, which led to the death of Miss Breonna Taylor. And then there's situational awareness. All right, never mind decision making. Situational awareness is these are all the things you're taking in as you're going. And everybody, I'm sure. Now look, I've been on plenty of no-knock raids, folks, but in combat, yeah, you're amped up. When it's go time and you're doing the countdown to execute, yeah, I get it. You're amped up, and you're aware. Your threat awareness is amped up for sure. But you have to also have that awareness of civilians and just collateral damage in general. I'm 100% in belief that if they would have announced themselves, Breonna Taylor would be alive. So, what impact overall did that have? Well, what impact would more focused training have had there? Likely, right? We can't say for sure, but likely. Well, I think if they would, had probably some more high-stress firearms handling, right? Just on the clock, man. Just timed, under stress, under time, skill improvement. That's one thing. Shoot, no shoot situation. Even in USPSA, you have no shoot targets. Now, yeah, they might be drastically different looking, but we've all shot the targets with the they call them the cartoons. One guy has a knife, one guy's holding like a stapler. I mean, look, however you do that, you do that. I think that's where training with UTM and stuff like that comes into play. The scenario force on force stuff. But it has to be controlled, of course. But skill drills, folks, skill drills to address these very issues. You have to be able to draw fast. You have to be able to hit what you're shooting at. You have to be able to shoot fast. But you also have to be able to identify what doesn't need to get shot. Yeah, you also have to identify that. Now, I can tell you this. I used to have a sergeant major who he had no sense of humor about flyers. Right, or a low percentage target. If somebody hit the hostage, this dude didn't have a sense of humor, man. It was bad. It was ass chewing, and then run it. You have to be able to identify the targets, folks. The threat. You have to be able to identify the threat, not just what's in his hand either, but demeanor. Is this dude shit scared and his eyes are big and he's got high pucker factor and he thought you were breaking into his house, but reality, he sees that you got police written across your chest? Do you have the discipline to take that pregnant pause? Yeah, with a dot on his chest, but not pulling the trigger to give that guy an extra half a second to indicate something. If he indicates he's going to bring the gun up and shoot you, blast him. But that's a high level of training, folks. That's high level training right there. And I just don't think Louisville had it. So more focused training. Now, that being said, that might not be everything, right? Training an individual to be his best self doesn't necessarily change sort of systemic issues like bad intelligence, for instance. That guy had a warrant. They had a warrant and found no drugs. So how good was the intelligence? I don't know. And then there's institutional pressures, like the organizational, like this is going to be an example. We need to get this guy off the streets, whatever. Kind of better planning and preparation also might have been able to do that. But let me tell you something. This dude, Kenneth Walker, instead of doing a no-knock raid at 12:40 a.m., is there a chance they could have just had eyes on his apartment and then picked him up at the 7-Eleven, with no incident whatsoever? I mean, there's 8 million different ways to do a thing. And I think they chose what they thought was going to be the most sexy way, but turned out to be a flaming disaster. All right, so that's the Breonna Taylor incident. We all know about it. We all saw it. You can feel one way or another about it. You can assume that Kenneth Walker was guilty if you want. But I think you need to be careful about that, because if you assume he was guilty because he was black or because of this, that, and the other, what happens if you find yourself in an ambiguous situation? Are we just going to assume you were guilty? Well, that's not what the law says, right? So be careful about making your assumptions or just backing the blue no matter what. Yeah, back the blue for sure. Law and order. We need some law and order. And police are doing a thankless job. That is true. Police are doing a thankless job. But they should be held to a higher standard when it comes to lethal force. It's my opinion. Okay. Next example. We have Willie McCoy shooting. That was in Vallejo, California. I want to say in 2019 or 2020. The Vallejo Police Department responded to a call about Willie McCoy as a 20-year-old black rapper unconscious in his car at the Taco Bell drive-thru with a gun in his lap. Officers surrounded the vehicle, and when McCoy kind of stirred a little bit, because he was asleep in his car, mind you, when he stirred, when he moved, officers fired 55 rounds in the span of 3.5 seconds. And they killed the guy, of course. And ultimately, one officer was disciplined for endangering colleagues with reckless firearm handling because of, possible fratricide or friendly fire, Because I imagined, I don't want to be ugly here, I don't know how that went down, but I can just imagine them doing a Polish ambush on the guy, right? Surrounding the car, everybody shooting inward toward each other. And if you're Polish, please don't be upset. I apologize. No bystanders were injured, but the officer's unsafe firearm handling created a risk of friendly fire, right? So bullets could have, especially shooting into a car, man. I don't care what any of these YouTube dudes have to say. You cannot predict accurately what a bullet's going to do once it passes through the window or the door of a car or the seat or you know what I mean? It's unpredictable. And that's the fact. It's unpredictable. You can guess, and you can get a good percentage of guessing. Yeah, shooting through windows, people have a general idea what's happening, but that's just a general idea, man. Depending on what the window's made out of, and all these things. There's so many variables. So at any rate, one cop, friendly fire was a hazard, but nobody got shot. But what was dubious about this whole thing? Well, shooting 55 rounds in 3 seconds. Like, how fearful were these dudes? I'm calling that into question, man. Like, how scared were they that the minute that dude flinched, that they blazed up 55 rounds in this guy? That's dubious, folks. That they seem to have had no plan whatsoever to take this dude. They were just meant to go shoot him, I think. And I don't know why, man. I don't know why. But there was now, speaking of proportionality, that was well out of proportion. That was well out of proportion. And that leads us again to the sympathetic firing. When one guy starts blazing away, everybody else wants to start blazing away. And it's unsafe. It's unprofessional. Yeah. So the context was the officers claimed McCoy reached for the gun, right? But body camera footage was inconclusive. So what that means, it was up for debate. If the body camera footage wasn't cut and dry, if it was ambiguous, then those dudes just basically got away with murder. So the car was boxed in, right? He couldn't have gone anywhere in the car the way it was. So 6 officers all fired, and one later fired in a way that risked hitting. Okay, that guy. Never mind that guy. Never mind a guy doing bad handling, shooting toward his partners. But 6 dudes fired into this car. That was in a fixed position. It was boxed in. In 2020, a special prosecutor report found that shooting legally justified, but criticized the officer's kind of reckless firearm handling. No charges were brought against any of the cops. And then the case again fueled local protests against the Vallejo PD. The use of excessive force. Public and legal scrutiny. So the McCoy family filed a wrongful death lawsuit alleging excessive force and racial bias. And apparently Vallejo has a high rate of officer-involved incidents, officer-involved shootings. So, is there a culture of, we're just taking a bad guy down? Who knows? That could be systemic. It could just be the individual, but there were 6 different officers. I've got to imagine there's at least, 2 or 3 different value systems in there. But I just, why do 6 officers need to open up on a dude in a car who is pretty much immobile? So what training standards were relevant to that, right? Firearms handling in general, shooting toward your homies is bad, pretty much always. In chaos, look, man, I've shot and been shot or had dudes shoot pretty close proximity to me before on my team. And sometimes given whatever situation you're in, it might have to happen that way. That's why especially on a team that you have a sort of high level of trust in your homies because you have a high level of training. If it was 6 rando cops, I don't think I would have any trust whatsoever. But at any rate, the 4 universal rules of firearm safety would have mitigated any dangerous firearm handling in that situation. And again, the proportionality, I don't think 6 dudes needed to do this. I think one guy could have done that. The guy who felt the most threat, right? Not just the dude flinched and 6 dudes opened up on him. Lethal force, as a civilian, what has to be present for you to use lethal force? You have to be able to articulate a fear of a loss of life or significant injury. It's possible that wasn't there, folks. Possible that wasn't there. And did these guys even remotely try to verbally control this guy? Or did they yell at him to wake up, and when he did, they blasted him because he moved? Kind of a catch-22, right? And then just team SOP development. I don't know if these dudes were all seasoned officers. I don't know if they all worked together. I don't know if it was just 6 random patrolmen. But somebody needs to be in charge of that crew. And whoever that is, if you just roll up and you happen to be the main guy, the senior guy, then take control, take charge, start moving people around. Don't just everybody just kind of, okay, we're going to Polish ambush this dude. If he moves, blast him. That's not leadership at all. So someone needs the senior guy, or even not even necessarily the senior guy, just the most experienced guy, but you have no way of knowing that. The senior guy needs to take charge and come up and have a better plan for fire control measures. Fire control measures, folks. That's a thing. That's a thing. And what training gaps could have helped mitigate, if any? Well, firearms discipline, man. The friggin' 4 universal rules of firearm safety. Don't point at anything you don't want to shoot. Keep your finger off trigger, not a trigger guard, till you have sights aligned on target. Clearly identify the threat and be aware of its surroundings. So this incident kind of highlighted insufficient firearms training. Yep. And again, yearly qualifications are just checking the block. That's all they're really doing. Over-reliance on lethal force. Again, now when I carry on about how cops need more firearms training, they need to be the most proficient firearms handlers out there. They do. But that also means knowing when not to use lethal force. And increased skill level will help you feel more comfortable making decisions not to use lethal force, because you know that you can pick it up whenever you need it. Whereas if you're a marginally trained guy or officer, female, whatever, you may not have the confidence in your skill level to kind of de-escalate with the possible need to re-escalate, right? The fact that 6 officers shot 55 rounds, that's just bizarre. Couldn't one of those guys had a taser or something? I mean, I wasn't there, wasn't there. But it seems crazy that they went from 0 to 55 rounds in like 3 seconds. So they might have, I don't know. That might be a department culture right there. I don't know. And then sort of a lack of team SOP development, teamwork, small unit tactics. I don't know, again, how many of those guys worked together before or have never. Who knows? But I know even as an infantryman, we practice approaching a vehicle as a fire team, how to not flag each other and still get maximum fire into the car if necessary. And then only firing if there was a legit threat And then, the guy pulling security is probably the most likely guy to fire, not everybody. I mean, that's an infantry skill. It's an infantry skill. So what I'm saying is, if that's a basic infantry skill, why on earth isn't it a basic police skill? Yeah. Team SOP development, teamwork, small unit tactics, turn a battle drill. Anything that can be made into a battle drill should. Now, why is that? Why should you have battle drills in regards to the cops? It's decision making. It kind of refines your decision making. But sadly, the cops are faced with multiple different unknown things there. But still, battle drill. That's an action you take if, right? If this happens, I go into battle drill this, right? Approaching a vehicle and clearing the vehicle, that's essentially battle drill. Impact. What impact? What kind of more focused training can we have? Well, scenario-based training with multiple officers involved in these scenarios, and holding them to a standard. By the way, don't have no bullcrap half-assing just because it's with UTM. Right? Emphasize communication. Emphasize muscle discipline. Right? Emphasize who needs to fire versus who doesn't. Who has the best shot versus who's just firing into the damn car. If you've ever done a training scenario like that, right? Why haven't you if you haven't? But like the guy's in the car and not responding, that should prompt an action from you. Not as soon as he moves, you blast him, right? Verbal commands, non-lethals. I think that would have saved the day there. Verbal commands and non-lethals probably would have saved the day there. Probably. But I don't know, folks. I'm just giving an opinion. Cultural factors. What is Vallejo PD? They have a culture of high violence. They have a history. They have a higher rate of officer-involved shootings than most. So what does that tell you? Either you got a bunch of aggressive cops or you got a bunch of untrained cops. One or the other. And maybe both, which is double dangerous. So there's food for thought there, folks. 6 cops shooting into a car on one guy. Food for thought. Food for thought. All right. Now, you guys drive with me to Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. Daunte Wright. Everybody remembers that one. This was in 2021. And Daunte Wright was a traffic stop by the Brooklyn Center police officer named, I ain't going to name her name. Yeah, Kim Potter. Fatally shot Daunte Wright, who's a 20-year-old black dude, after she mistook her firearm for a taser. She stopped this guy for an expired tag, and he had an outstanding warrant. So he was going to go to jail. He resisted arrest and attempted to flee. All right. Now we see a clear escalation. And that caused Miss Kim Potter to pull out what she thought was her taser to drop Daunte, but it wasn't her taser at all. And she killed Daunte Wright. He was a sole victim. There wasn't any, any fratricide or any innocent civilians or anything like that. It did occur in a public area. And there was a risk to people standing around there because she didn't even know she had her gun in her hand. So that's clearly is it a training failure? I mean, to some of us, that just seems so obvious that how could you mistake your taser for your pistol? The dubious element of this whole thing obviously is that, right? So she either doesn't have her firearm in her hand enough to know what it feels like, or she don't have her taser in her hand enough to know what it feels like. And this, folks, is a 26-year veteran. 26-year veteran of the police force. So good on her for using the levels of escalation, right? Non-lethal, or thinking she was using the non-lethal, but she didn't. Body camera footage showed that she was even yelling taser, taser, taser before she pulled the daggum trigger, man. So now her firearm was out in front of her face that she should be able to clearly see that it was not a bright yellow thing in her hand, but a black firearm. Yeah. And then she says, "Oh, I grabbed the wrong gun." Oh. So Daunte Wright was unarmed. He did resist, and he created a perceived threat. She wasn't wrong in being threatened for him resisting and all that kind of stuff. And it was an outstanding warrant, which I don't know for what. But this happened right in the midst of all the George Floyd stuff, which we've talked about on here a little bit. So the outcome of that, she was convicted of first and second degree manslaughter and sentenced to 2 years. She did resign, and the city settled with Daunte Wright's family for a lot of money. And the case prompted Minnesota to mandate stricter taser training. Now, I think mandating stricter firearms training versus stricter taser training, I mean, both for sure. But again, if you wrongfully shoot somebody with a taser, it just sucks for them a little bit. They're not dead. The shooting occurred near Minneapolis, and that's where the Derek Chauvin trial was going on, and all that was sparking a bunch of racial protests. So then, the public scrutiny there was just out of control, because it seemed like for a little while there was just one after the other getting highlighted on the news, and arguably by design. But so Daunte Wright's family wanted to argue that it was a racially motivated stop and all that stuff. But I mean, if you got warrants and you're riding around with expired tags, I mean, come on, man. That doesn't excuse that. That's not a death sentence, however. What relevant standards were at play here? What relevant standards were at play? Well, firearms handling. Now, this was all point blank range, right? But she clearly didn't make the distinction between a lethal firearm and a friggin' taser. That's a blatant. And look, whatever the training program is, the officer has responsibility here. And I tell this to my students all the time. Look, you can come out here and give me money. If you don't implement what I teach you, you're just giving me money. You have to implement the things that you learn, that you're taught. Use of deadly force. Yeah, she thought she was doing the right thing. She thought she was, which is a bigger problem. So this problem here wasn't malice. It was incompetence, outright. And then under stress, right? She clearly was so overwhelmed with events. She was so overwhelmed with events that she wasn't able to manage her stress. She wasn't able to see that I don't have a big yellow thing in my hand. She was yelling taser. So she clearly goes through emotions, right? When she's in training, her once a year training for taser, using her taser. Taser, taser, taser. and then popped a dude. So she either doesn't have enough training over 26 years, or she doesn't pay attention. One or the other. Yep. I don't know how often officers train with their tasers. Like, I can't imagine it's that much, because they only train with their lethal firearm. Most of them are just once a year, unless you go out by yourself, on your own. So I wonder if it's even worse with tasers. I wonder. Huh. So then stress management, we talked about that. And then just misjudgment, right? Escalation. Like I said, I thought she was kind of doing the right thing. She just thought she thought she was too. She just wasn't. But I don't know. Could that have, what would have happened? What if the guy would have just ran away and she didn't blast him? This one's a hard one, because she just straight up grabbed the wrong gun and just didn't realize it. And that is unexcusable. All right. That's enough of that. So let's look at what's some common threads across each of these incidents we just talked about. One of the common themes is excessive or misjudged force. The other two cases were excessive force, for sure. Excessive rounds fired into the targets. And then this last one was just straight up misjudgment. But they were all disproportionate. And they all lead to some kind of training failure, be it mechanical skills of shooting or just situational awareness and decision making under stress. So some of the things that these agencies need to think about is high stress firearms handling, not just these qualifications that they do, but like truly high stress. You can't replicate somebody trying to kill you, but UTMs hurt pretty good. UTM rounds or simunition rounds, they hurt pretty good, right? They hurt enough that you should be getting the lesson there. You should be intimate as a police officer. You should be absolutely intimate with your firearm. You should be absolutely intimate with your firearm. But there's no excuse for reaching for your taser and coming out with your Glock and not knowing it immediately. No excuse. And then some of the small unit tactics, team SOP development. Because when you got 6 dudes and they all 6 think that they're the main character, there's no telling what's going to happen. Somebody's got to be in charge. Somebody's got to take charge. And when you build battle drills and you build SOPs, you can't SOP everything. You got to let situations develop. However, that's the foundation. The SOPs and the battle drills are the foundation of what you do from there. Do you know what I'm saying? And these, man, it kills me with these police like certifications and then the requalifications. I've seen guys with resumes, they got 30 odd certifications on their resume for, frickin' taser this and beanbag that and all these things, man. All these things, they get all these certifications and all they do is just check the block. You go take a couple hours of training, then you never get another piece of training on it. It's just to check the block. Residual risk, bystanders, friendly fire. Each one of these incidents puts someone else in danger. Each one did. With the first one, it was shooting through apartment walls into other apartments. With the dude in the car, it was like 6 officers surrounding the car, shooting at each other, shooting toward each other. And then with this last one, with the mistaken identity on the firearm versus taser, that was in a public space, man. She didn't realize she had a lethal killing machine in her hand. Man, it's just so bizarre. So you could talk about all kind of training to address those things. And then in context of like systemic problems, right? All of those alleged some kind of racial bias because all the victims there were black. Not all the cops were black or white. There was a mix in each of those incidents. But like the Vallejo Police Department, they have an inordinate amount of officer involved shooting. So that kind of implies that there's a culture around there of, I can see them being like, oh yeah, we take it to the bad guy. I can see them thinking that way, but that's not always right, man. It's not always right because even bad guys have constitutional rights. So it's hard to train away some of these deep-rooted systemic cultural issues. You can legislate it away. Yeah, it's illegal to be biased on the base of race or whatever. But you don't know a person's heart. So if you got a racist cop on your department and he's running around shooting black guys, if he's got like 3 or 4 officer involved shootings in the past 2 years, hey guy, dial it back a little bit. You can't train away somebody's character flaws unless they want to change. So the role of training is critical. It's critical. And the cops, they need more focused training with firearms. That's mechanical skill. That's muzzle discipline. That's moving around with a gun. That's target discrimination. even weapon differentiation, man. Like, you got to know. Now, most agencies, you have your taser on one side and your firearm on the other. Stress management and decision making under stress. That stuff can be trained. De-escalation can be trained. Yeah, it can be trained. Scenario-based training is good. You still need a high level of skill. Your skill trumps tactics. I said that, and I will continue to say it. Skill trumps tactics. But unless you do these scenario-based training drills, I think what the scenarios do is they give you a little Rolodex of, okay, this went this way, this worked, or this didn't. So let's reset and do it again. I think you're just building a little database, because most people don't know how they're going to react in a situation until it happens. But if you've had a chance to run through a similar situation, under time, under stress, that'll start to get in there and build your little neural pathways and all those things to give you sort of a direction to go. While I still need to solve this on the go, but I'm not having to solve it from scratch. I have a little bit. The more scenarios you can build in, now you can't replicate everything, but you can take scenarios that have happened before and replicate those. There's a channel on YouTube called Active Self-Protection, ASP, and they have videos of shootings from all over the world, man. And in one of my classes, I take about 4 or 5 videos that happen of shootings that happen in and around the Atlanta area. And then I recreate those scenarios for my students to see how they react to them. And it's a very effective way to build scenarios, because it's based off literal, real things that have happened. And it gives them an opportunity to, give it a go and fail, and then give it a go again, and then to start to build up their decision-making process under stress. It's very good. It's very good that we do that. You just can't, it's impossible to emphasize how important training is, and then just how little of it that they get. So Minnesota ended up, their taser training, they upped their taser training mandate, and that obviously was a net gain. The more training you do on a thing, obviously, the more efficient you're going to be with it, and the less errors were reported statewide on that because of that incident. And then departments, again, I talked about simunitions or UTM. They report fewer bystander injuries because that's the thing they train to think about. What are some limitations on training? Training cannot fully mitigate everything, right? Like in the Breonna Taylor case, that it's arguable that was a bad warrant, right? That the intel that they got that warrant approved was probably inadequate. So firearms training alone can't fix that. That's the intel guys doing their job correctly, and intel analysts and the cops working the confidential informants who are giving them information and trying to ascertain whether it's legit or not. All right, that's a whole different training, right? That's a whole different part of knowing your job. And then, like, department culture. Now, good training leads to confidence. And confidence, I think, helps mitigate any of this, these reactions, these aggressive reactions. I think the more, now, not just confidence, but skill, that confidence based in your skill, not just bravado, not just, testosterone and friggin' monster confidence. I mean, like, literal confidence in your skill to help you be more judicious with that skill. But these departments that have a culture of violating rights, for instance, you can't train that away necessarily. That's things that have to be talked about philosophically. That's leadership setting the tone and holding people accountable if they are overly aggressive. Now, I don't mind a bad guy getting scuffed up. They need to have some consequence when they're out there doing savagery. But almost nothing short of murder justifies murder, right? Yeah, I don't mind a bad guy getting the boots put to him if he's a legitimate bad guy, but again, my department culture might be a little looser than someone else's, but all my guys are going to be highly trained, and they're not going to accidentally shoot somebody. FBI notes that only 40% of agencies consistently report use of force data. Yeah. So if you don't even have to report use of force incidents, on a larger scale, well, whatever, then nobody's going to call you out on it. Then it's just going to be this once in a blue moon where something shows up on TikTok or something. And then you fight through that, you mitigate it, you settle with a family. So with the $12 million settled with Breonna Taylor's family, how much of that could have went to some training and mitigated that whole incident? Now, here's one that I'm gonna elaborate on a little bit. Over-reliance on militarized training may also exacerbate escalation of force. Now, what are you calling militarized training? I tell you this. Shooting a gun, and I've said this on other podcasts, once the decision to pull the trigger has been made, shooting is functionally the same across, whether it's combat, whether it's self-defense, whether it's a police incident, or whether it's a competition out on the range on the weekend. The skill is the skill. So to call it militarized training is that's a fluff word. The skill is the skill. Rules of engagement are rules of engagement. Cops have different ones than soldiers most of the time. So militarized training is a little misnomer. It's not really militarized training to be proficient with your firearm. Your cops are armed professionals. They carry guns all day, every day. So if you want to call it militarized training, what does that mean? And that assumes that soldiers are able just to go march through a town and just murder everybody. And that just ain't the case, folks. In SF, you got to account for every single round. You don't just go get to murder civilians. And believe me, if you killed a civilian, every gunfight gets a 15-6 investigation? Is that what it's called? Every gunfight gets an investigation, folks. Just like with the cops. So I would get away from thinking of militarized training as a thing. It's not militarized training at all. Small unit tactics is small unit tactics. You apply whatever tactic goes to whatever your situation is. Now, I'll give you an example of militarized training that went south is Ruby Ridge. Yeah, you had cops cruising around in the woodline like they were snipers, sniper observer teams, and then they ended up smoking Randy Weaver's wife by accident or on purpose. Either way, unacceptable. All right. So what can we do? As police, what can we do? We can have mandates for more frequent training. As opposed to doing a qual once a year or twice a year, you could do it quarterly. Or you could let your qual be the check the box and then just actually do real training and then just do your qual once a year. Whatever. The qual don't mean anything. That's just some way to get numbers to say, okay, you're good to go, even though it's poor standards. So enhanced training protocols. Just that's it, man. You do more scenario-based training. Do more skill drill training. Squeeze in de-escalation in there, right? Have the non-threats in your scenario. And then what else? Enhanced training. Team-based drills, right? Small unit tactics. Have training days where you have rando patrol officers come together and work on, sort of SOPs. And when I say SOP, I mean agency-wide, right? And, let your SWAT team sort of set the pace for that. And then have patrol cops come and learn these SOPs and work on their skills. Work out how you're going to have a chain of command. Work out how your chain of command is going to work in any given situation. Work on succinct, short, and effective communication. Yeah, on the objective. All right, minimal talking. Say what needs to be said to who it needs to be said to. All right, communication. Small unit tactics and good communication. And then policy, right? Never mind with increased training standards, but more focused policies when it comes to no-knock. Again, I don't agree with no-knock warrants, folks. Yeah, you can take me up on that. You can give me a call. I don't think in America we should be doing no-knock warrants. Traffic stop escalations. We've all seen the videos where cop walks up to the driver door. Bad guy pulls a gun. That's a hairy situation. I get it. The only way to defeat that situation is skill. Build your skill that will build your confidence so that you already have in your mind what you're going to do should that bad thing happen. And then policy for, reporting, the use of force reporting. And that's higher level stuff. Yeah, I think the police should be held accountable at every level. I think police should wear body cameras every time, all the time. I think that would only serve to help the police so as to get rid of any ambiguity. But what that does, that means the police has to be on the P's and Q's. All right, so now you just have to be a more professional officer. And folks, there ain't nothing wrong with that. All right, man, that was kind of a long rant there, but I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to wrap it up. So we talked about Breonna Taylor, that incident. We talked about Willie McCoy, and then we talked about Daunte Wright. And these all had their own, and I specifically picked these incidents, folks, because they were all dubious incidents. There's plenty of legitimate officer-involved shootings out there. Don't get me wrong, I'm not just crapping on the police, but these are ones that could have been prevented. And anytime life can be preserved, it needs to be preserved. Each of these incidents illustrated deficiencies with firearms handling, lethal force decision-making, right? Escalation or de-escalation, and situational awareness, being acutely aware of what's going on around you. In each of the situations, there was a good opportunity for innocent bystanders to be injured or fratricide. So, I always lean on training. Because I do it for a living, yeah, but I've seen the effects of excellent training versus poor training. So the agencies need to start thinking about more focused training, emphasizing stress, emphasizing decision-making on the move, becoming more intimate with their firearms and their tools, the tools of the trade, right? Their taser and their firearm and their freaking baton and their pepper spray and all that stuff and their AR-15. All right, the two ones that are lethal there, your pistol and your AR, you should be an absolute expert with those firearms, without question, because you're walking around not only with lethal force on your hip or in your car and the ability to use it at any time, but then in many cases you have the force of law that allows you to get away with something that a civilian wouldn't get away with when it comes to negligence. All right, so that's unacceptable to me. So training. Skill trumps tactics. Have the skill first. Build the SOPs to help navigate the tactics. Work under stress and scenario-based situations. And then again, the training alone, right? We're talking about agency, the culture of an agency. Leadership is responsible here, folks. Leadership is responsible to set the tone, to set the tone of excellence, or to set the tone of complacency, or to set the tone of max violence, or to set the tone of soft on crime. All of those things are out there. The leadership is who's responsible for that. You should have policies that hold officers accountable, that they're fair, but hold officers accountable. don't let officers slide with negligence. Don't let officers slide with negligence. Don't let your culture support underlying racism or underlying biases. Don't do it. Don't let your department do that. Call it out. Accountability. It's all about individual accountability. And for cops, it's all about agency accountability. Be a professional. Be a professional. All right, folks. I know that may have seemed like a rant. It probably was a little bit. But in my later years here, I'm finding that poor training is not only like, it's getting to the point that it makes me angry. It's getting to the point that the excuses wear thin, folks. I understand there's a difference between reasons and excuses. But if you're an armed professional, you have no excuses. You should thrive to be the best out there. You should thrive to be the best shooter in your squad, in your element, in your section, whatever it is, on your team. You should challenge others to be the best because you have a responsibility to the general public. The job of law enforcement, in my opinion, is to protect individual rights. Now, obviously, the job of law enforcement is to solve crime. I don't know how much prevent crime it does, but it's definitely meant to solve crime. But in my opinion, a part of that is protecting individual rights, not violating them, not being so shit scared when you approach a vehicle that when the guy moves, you blast him. All right? You police are meant to be held to a higher standard. Is that unfair? If you think it is, give me a call. If you think it is, give me a call. Edgar Mills at OspreyShootingSolutions.com. The police are meant to be held to a higher standard. You carry lethality on your hip. So do I. I'm a concealed carrier. I carry lethality with me every day. I wouldn't be able to get away with some of the stuff that cops get away with, right? Well, the authority, whatever about authority. I train to be precise. I train to be fast, and I train to be precise. And that's not a far leap, folks. That is not a big stretch for police to get the training they need to be at the skill level they need to be at. Like I said, folks, thanks for listening to this episode. I'm not doing this just to bash on cops. I'm doing this to set up, and it's not a series, but I'm going to have some law enforcement guys coming on pretty soon. And I'm excited about that because I really want to see what they have to say. And I thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it. If you have any topics you'd like to hear about, or you think that I should research and get on and pontificate on, let me know. Please hit me up. We can go to thejuntopodcast.com or hit me at Edgar Mills at OspreyShootingSolutions.com for your suggestions. If you have any blog entries, if you want to write a paper on a topic that you're passionate about, just make sure it's fairly well edited, that, it's at, a ninth grade level or so. Send that in to me and I'll put it up on the website, on the blogs. If you want to be a guest on the podcast or know someone who's interesting that you would like to get on the podcast, hit me up. I'm happy to entertain interesting humans. And what else? We got some stuff. We got Libertarian Range Day coming up this Saturday, so please jump in that. I'm sure there's more seats available. So we're going to shoot for, much of the day, and then we're going to head over to Andy's house, who's a Libertarian party member, and we're going to head over there and have some hot dogs and hamburgers and a couple of cold drinks and talk about life, love, and politics and whatnot. The following weekend is the Everyday Carry course. That is full, but I've got a standby list going. So if someone drops from that, activate the standby list. Unfortunately, usually one or two people cancel without letting me know. And it's just no call, no show. And that's tragic. That's unprofessional that people do that. But anyway, I do have a standby list for that. Let's see. And then I think we have at the end of the month a wild card day. And that's just a series of skill drills. And then we do the Blackjack 33 challenge, which is a 6-stage drill for score to try to earn a coin that no one has yet, by the way. And as far as the Junto podcast, I'm going to go ahead and share with you. I got a friend who's going to be on the podcast with me. I believe the next episode we're going to record this weekend. And he is a musician from Australia, and he's a world traveler, and he's just a generally interesting dude. So I'm going to have him on to kind of talk about his life and music and things like that. So stay tuned and listen out for some good stuff. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys. We're at 5,000 listeners now. I'm stoked about that. Let's try to get that to 10,000. Please like, follow, share, and all the things on all the platforms. And you guys take care. Stay safe. I love you guys.